Hi, I'm Nathan, and today I gathered cases of pranksters who spent years turning other people into the joke until they became the victims instead. From roommates who trapped their prankster friend inside a sleeper couch as payback to a clown chase prank that ended in horror nobody was prepared for. It was February 18th, 2015, in a quiet rental duplex outside Columbus, Ohio. Snow from the previous weekend still sat in dirty piles along the curb, while cold wind rattled the basement windows. Inside the house, music, beer bottles, and old gaming consoles made the night feel completely normal. Kyle Morez was 23 years old and taking classes at a local community college while working part-time unloading delivery trucks. Most people knew Kyle as the funny guy who always needed attention. The problem was that Kyle never really knew when to stop. If somebody looked embarrassed, that usually just made the prank funnier to him. Kyle treated the duplex like his own prank channel long before prank videos became common online. He hid roommates' shoes in dumpsters, swapped shampoo with dish soap, and once glued a shaving cream nozzle shut so it exploded across his roommate's face before work. And I think that's the part that would have annoyed me the most. Kyle didn't just want the reaction in the moment. He wanted something he could replay and laugh at afterward. At first, his roommates, Mason and Eric, tried laughing it off, but after months of being filmed, embarrassed, and turned into the punchline of Kyle's online videos, the resentment inside that house started building fast. One prank ended with Mason showing up late to a job interview covered in shaving cream. Another got Eric recognized at school after classmates passed around Kyle's videos. By that point, this wasn't roommates joking around anymore. They genuinely wanted to embarrass Kyle back the same way he'd embarrassed them. A week before the incident, Kyle uploaded another prank compilation online. One clip showed Mason and Eric walking straight into duct tape stretched across their bedroom doorway, sending them stumbling into the hallway while Kyle laughed behind the camera. And because of that, even strangers at school started recognizing them. And I can definitely see here why the roommates stopped finding any of it funny anymore. According to investigators, friends later said the roommates had spent days talking about pranking Kyle back. The duplex basement still had an old fold-out sleeper sofa with a heavy spring-loaded steel frame that snapped shut hard if the locking bar wasn't secured properly. Kyle often slept on it while gaming, so during a Friday night of drinking and playing games downstairs, Mason eventually joked about stuffing Kyle into the same couch he always crashed on. Everyone laughed, even Kyle. Then, Eric grabbed the steel frame handle. To them, it was just revenge disguised as another prank. While Kyle was distracted, Mason and Eric suddenly lifted the mattress frame upward together. Kyle rolled toward the center crease and laughed at first, clearly expecting them to stop. Instead, the heavy frame snapped shut around him with a violent metallic slam. Inside the couch, Kyle's chest and shoulders became pinned against the steel bars, making it difficult to breathe or push himself free. Investigators later found bent springs, showing how hard he struggled inside the frame. At first, the roommates thought he was still playing along. The couch shook while muffled yelling came from inside the cushions, but after a minute, the movements became weaker. Mason joked that Kyle was finally getting a taste of his own pranks, while Eric recorded part of it on his phone. What finally changed the mood was when Eric noticed liquid running from beneath the cushions, and Mason heard a low choking sound before everything suddenly stopped. When they pulled the couch open, Kyle was unresponsive. Paramedics arrived shortly afterward, but he was pronounced dead after being transported to the hospital. Authorities later concluded the roommates never intended to kill Kyle, but prosecutors argued the prank became criminal once they ignored clear signs he was in distress. Both later accepted plea deals for involuntary manslaughter. What really gets me about Kyle's case is how normal everything still felt downstairs while he was dying a few feet away. But this next story starts with the same problem: people treating dangerous equipment like part of the joke. It was February 9th, 2013, inside a shipyard in Mobile, Alabama. Cold air rolled through the loading docks every time the hull doors opened, mixing with the smell of grease, burnt metal, and welding smoke trapped inside the steel compartments. Crews were still working long after midnight, trying to finish repairs. Trent Holloway was 32 years old and had spent most of his life working welding jobs. Around the shipyard, he had a reputation for being skilled, fast, and miserable to train under if you were new. And honestly, the way former co-workers described him, it sounded less like harmless joking and more like somebody who liked watching people panic. According to co-workers, Trent's favorite prank involved secretly messing with welding visors before jobs started. Sometimes he swapped lenses. Other times, he partly covered the shield so apprentices suddenly couldn't see once sparks started flying. Several workers later admitted they stopped reporting it because supervisors rarely did anything beyond verbal warnings. Trent called them blind weld jokes, but around live arcs, cutting torches, and gas lines, they were incredibly dangerous. And the worst part was that Trent usually filmed the reactions afterward like the whole thing was entertainment instead of a shipyard full of things that could kill somebody in seconds. One apprentice named Gabe Mercer became Trent's favorite target after nearly burning through a live pipe during one of the pranks. The video spread around the yard for weeks, and older welders started calling Gabe Stevie Wonder every time he walked through the bay. According to co-workers, Gabe eventually started avoiding the break room just to escape the mocking. After months of watching Trent gain attention, Gabe started talking about making his own channel. Co-workers later said Gabe joked that filming Trent looking stupid might also boost his channel followers. On the night of February 9th, crews were working inside a cramped ship hull filled with welding sparks and oxygen lines. Before the shift, Gabe smeared anti-spatter gel mixed with grease around Trent's visor, causing the sparks to distort his vision. He also hid his phone nearby, planning to record Trent struggling on the job. Almost immediately, Trent started fighting with the visor while nearby workers laughed. Frustrated and partially blinded, he stepped backward without checking behind him and hooked his boot under one of the oxygen hoses. The lines snapped loose near the cutting station, releasing a high-pressure stream of oxygen into the compartment while Trent's welding arc was still active. The oxygen rapidly intensified the fire around the sparks, causing flames to race across Trent's jacket and clothing almost instantly. Workers outside the hull later described hearing a loud pop before flames pushed through the hatch opening. Trent tried tearing the gear off his body. The fabric had already melted against his skin. By the time nearby workers dragged him outside, he had suffered severe burns across his chest, neck, and arms. He stayed conscious long enough to complain that his throat felt like it was closing before dying 2 days later from burn and inhalation injuries. After the incident, the shipyard was fined for multiple safety violations, including unsecured gas lines and poor enforcement of prank complaints. Gabe was later charged with criminal negligence after investigators recovered the phone footage he had hidden near the work area. He eventually accepted a plea deal and lost his welding certification permanently. Trent spent years turning safety into entertainment, and eventually everybody around him stopped taking danger seriously too. The next story feels different at first, until another prank object stops behaving the way people expected. It was September 14, 2017, at a riverside rental house outside Chattanooga, Tennessee. Warm air from the Tennessee River drifted through the open patio doors, while music echoed across the backyard from a Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. Empty beer bottles and wet footprints from the river still covered parts of the floor. Jonas Lee was 25 years old and worked landscaping jobs with his older cousin during the week. He was quieter than most of his friends, the kind of guy who usually laughed things off instead of starting arguments. Around somebody like Louis Garner, that usually meant becoming an easy target. Louis treated every gathering like a prank challenge. He hid dead crickets in people's shoes, jumped out wearing masks, and once staged a fake break-in with a toy handgun that nearly sent one of his roommates through a sliding glass door. Most people laughed afterward because that was just what everyone expected from him. But honestly, living around somebody constantly trying to scare people probably gets exhausting fast. A week before the river trip, Louis uploaded another prank video online. It showed Jonas asleep on the couch while Louis dragged a fake blood-covered knife across his throat and screamed loud enough to wake the entire house. The clip spread through their friend group within days. During the weekend river trip, Jonas finally decided to prank Louis back. Earlier that afternoon, he and 2 roommates bought a realistic retractable stage knife from a costume store outside Chattanooga. The blade was designed to slide back into the handle on contact, creating the illusion of a stabbing. Before the prank happened, though, the knife slipped off the kitchen counter and hit the tile floor hard. One friend tested it quickly against his palm and saw the blade still retracting, so everyone assumed it was fine. Investigators later found the impact had cracked part of the internal spring mechanism, leaving a small section of the metal tip exposed if pressure hit the blade at the wrong angle. Nobody noticed the damage. Late that night, Louis sat near the kitchen island, drinking beer while scrolling through music. Jonas crept up behind him while another roommate secretly recorded from across the room. The prank worked almost perfectly. Jonas jabbed the prop knife into Louis' side, sending him stumbling backward before realizing there was no pain. The room exploded with laughter once Jonas revealed the retracting blade, and that should have ended the whole prank game, but instead, Louis grabbed the knife and started joking about using it on someone else next. A few minutes later, Jonas stepped onto the back patio, while Louis followed behind him, holding the same prop knife. Then, everything went wrong at once. Louis lunged forward, jokingly at the exact moment Jonas stepped sideways into the fake stab. The damaged blade jammed partially open instead of collapsing. The exposed metal tip slipped between Jonas's ribs and drove deep into his chest. Witnesses later said Jonas actually laughed for another second before his expression changed completely. Even after being stabbed, he still thought it was part of the joke. Then blood started pouring through his fingers. The blade had pierced part of his heart and damaged major blood vessels near his lung. Jonas tried speaking, but only managed a choking sound before collapsing against the sliding door frame. At first, one roommate still thought he was pretending because the entire night had been built around fake panic and reactions. Then, Louis grabbed the wound, and blood immediately spread across his hand. That was the moment the room stopped laughing. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Jonas lost consciousness before they could stabilize him. He died shortly after reaching the hospital. Authorities later charged Louis with reckless homicide. Investigators said there was no evidence Louis realized the prop knife had been damaged after the earlier fall, but prosecutors argued he acted recklessly by continuing to use it during another prank. He eventually accepted a plea deal with a reduced prison sentence, while Jonas's family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit over the incident. Jonas's case honestly feels terrifying because the danger was sitting there the entire night and nobody recognized it anymore. And the next story starts the same way. Another group focused on getting a reaction instead of realizing how fast panic can spiral. Before we get into the next case, let me know in the comments which story so far felt the most disturbing to you. And if you're enjoying the episode, make sure to subscribe because the next one might be the hardest to watch yet. It was July 19th, 2016, at a crowded lake house near Lake Travis, outside Austin, Texas. Humid air drifted through the open windows, while boat lights reflected across the dark water outside. Inside the house, wet towels, beer cans, and fishing gear were scattered across the hardwood floors after a full day of drinking in the sun. Caleb Rowe was 27 years old and worked dock repair jobs around Austin. His friend group, Caleb, had a reputation for turning every weekend into some kind of joke. He filmed fake jump scares, dumped lake water on sleeping friends, and once zip-tied a buddy's cooler shut during a fishing trip just to record the reaction later. Most of it stayed harmless, but honestly, once alcohol got involved, the group usually stopped thinking about where the line actually was. In July 2016, several friends rented a small lake house outside Marble Falls to celebrate Caleb's birthday. By the second night, while everyone had been drinking for hours, grilling outside, they decided to mess with the birthday guy. Around midnight, two friends came up with the idea of spiking Caleb's sports bottle with ghost pepper puree, concentrated pepper extract, and blended habaneros while he slept on the sectional couch downstairs. The plan was simple. Wake him up dehydrated, let him chug the bottle, then film the reaction while everyone laughed. They expected coughing, tears, maybe vomiting. Nothing more serious than that. Around 2:13 in the morning, Caleb's older cousin Tyler came back inside after fishing and started making instant ramen in the kitchen. As he poured near boiling water into a thick ceramic mug, two of Caleb's friends quietly shook Caleb awake on the sectional couch nearby, while everyone else waited, trying not to laugh. Half asleep, dehydrated, and still drunk, Caleb immediately grabbed the sports bottle beside him and took several huge swallows before he was even fully awake. Tyler had just set the steaming mug down on the coffee table moments earlier before turning back toward the kitchen. The reaction happened almost instantly. Witnesses said Caleb jerked upright so violently the bottle flew from his hands. Within seconds, he was coughing, gagging, and barely able to see through the tears. Still panicking, Caleb grabbed the nearest cup on the table beside him. It was Tyler's mug of still scalding ramen water. Without even looking, Caleb took a huge gulp, trying to kill the burning in his mouth from the pepper mixture. The reaction was immediate. Witnesses said Caleb jerked forward violently the second the water hit his throat. Instead of spitting it back out cleanly, he inhaled sharply mid-swallow while gasping for air. The near-boiling water and steam went deep into his throat and airway. Caleb dropped the mug as he stumbled backward. The ceramic shattered across the hardwood while he clawed at his neck with both hands. A choking sound came out of him that several friends later described as sounding wet and strained at the same time. Within seconds, saliva started pouring from his mouth while his coughing turned harsh and uneven. At first, a couple of friends still thought he was exaggerating because everyone had been laughing seconds earlier. But then, blisters began forming across Caleb's lips and the inside of his mouth. When he tried inhaling again, he suddenly coughed pink, blood-streaked fluid down the front of his chest. That was the moment the room stopped laughing. Witnesses later said Caleb's breathing changed terrifyingly fast. Every inhale sounded tighter and weaker than the last, while he struggled to pull air through the swelling in his throat. By the time paramedics arrived, he could barely speak and was starting to lose consciousness from lack of oxygen. Doctors placed him on a ventilator at the hospital, but the burns inside his throat and lungs kept swelling over the next several hours. He died the following afternoon from severe thermal airway injuries and respiratory failure. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental. Investigators determined the hot water and steam had severely burned Caleb's airway, and the panic inhalation forced some of the superheated liquid into his lungs. Over the next several hours, the damaged tissue continued swelling until he could no longer breathe. Two of Caleb's friends were later charged with reckless endangerment and criminally negligent homicide for the pepper prank. Investigators specifically stated Tyler was not blamed for leaving the mug on the table, since he had no involvement in the prank and believed the water was simply cooling beside the couch. What stayed with me about Caleb's case is how quickly people stopped laughing once they realized the body doesn't care whether something started as a joke. And this next prank turns deadly for almost the same reason. It was April 22, 2017, behind an apartment complex outside Kansas City, Missouri. Rain had been falling on and off all evening, leaving the abandoned rail corridor soaked with mud and standing water. Rusted freight cars creaked in the wind, while weak security lights barely reached the overgrown path beside the tracks. Devin Shaw was 24 years old and worked overnight warehouse shifts loading freight trucks outside the city. Online, though, he spent most of his free time filming prank videos with a few friends. The problem was that Devin's clips only got attention when the reactions looked real. The more frightened people seemed, the faster the videos spread. So over time, the pranks became more extreme. Fake break-ins, fake kidnappings, random clown ambushes filmed in parking lots and alleyways. Most of the videos featured strangers or friends who had no idea they were being recorded until afterward. One of the people who always ended up helping Devin film those videos was his younger cousin, Terry. Friends later said Terry looked up to Devin and wanted to be part of the prank page himself. So when Devin suggested filming a killer clown chase video inside an abandoned rail corridor near the apartment complex, Terry agreed immediately. Behind the apartments sat an old rail maintenance path locals often used as a shortcut between parking lots and nearby stores. The area was poorly lit and lined with chain-link fencing, rusted freight cars, weeds, and narrow drainage trenches running beside the tracks. Some sections had partially collapsed concrete, and rusted steel reinforcement bars were visible through cracks near the trench edges. After several days of rain, parts of the ground had become unstable beneath soaked plywood and weeds. The plan sounded simple. Terry would wear a cheap clown costume and chase Devin for a few seconds, while another friend recorded the reaction on a phone. Then, they would reveal the joke and upload the footage online. Around 11:40 that night, Devin entered the corridor wearing headphones after leaving a nearby convenience store. Terry stepped into the narrow pathway wearing the clown mask and dragging a fake foam axe against the metal fence. The scraping sound echoed through the corridor. At first, Devin actually laughed because he immediately realized it was probably another prank video. But Terry kept charging toward him, screaming and swinging the fake axe hard enough that Devin suddenly bolted deeper between the freight cars anyway. Witnesses later said the whole thing escalated faster than anybody expected once Devin started genuinely running. The cell phone footage shook violently as the friend recording sprinted behind them through the mud. Near the tracks, Devin reached what looked like a shallow drainage gap beside the fence. In reality, it was the weakened edge of one of the old maintenance trenches, hidden beneath weeds and water-soaked plywood. He jumped without slowing down. The concrete gave way the second his foot landed. Devin's leg dropped through first, twisting his body sideways before his chest slammed directly onto one of the exposed steel rods protruding from the collapsed trench wall. At first, Terry laughed because he thought Devin was exaggerating the fall for the camera. But then Devin tried speaking and only managed a wet, choking sound. Blood immediately started spreading through the rainwater beneath him. Witnesses later said Devin's breathing changed terrifyingly fast. Within less than a minute, blood was bubbling from the corner of his mouth, while every breath sounded weaker than the last. Paramedics arrived quickly, but Devin had already lost massive amounts of blood. He died shortly after reaching the hospital. The medical examiner later determined the steel rod had pierced his lung and torn a major artery beneath his collarbone during the fall. Investigators later recovered the cell phone footage from the friend recording the prank, which helped reconstruct the exact sequence of the chase and collapse. Authorities concluded Terry never intended to kill Devin, but prosecutors argued the prank became criminal when someone was chased through a dangerous industrial corridor while disguised and waving what appeared to be a real weapon. Terry eventually accepted a plea deal for criminally negligent homicide that included probation, community service, and a reduced jail sentence.